pretty important topics on the agenda. Okay, call the school committee meeting from March 7th, 2022 to order, and a quick rundown of the agenda, and then we will get started. So we would start with public comment, but we don't have anybody here. We'll still start with it in case anybody does show up. We have the consent agenda, which has a pretty cool thing in it, and then we have reports. Personnel action, we'll do a quick discussion of the superintendent's mid-year formative review. All the details from every committee member are in the packet, but we can talk through that as well. We then have a discussion on in principal search, and we'll, any adjustments we want to make or whatnot, and we'll approve that as we work our way through it. We then have the MSBA Kilim update and the next steps discussion. We've publicly announced it already, but we are in the eligibility phase now. So, well, not yet, because officially it starts June 1st, but we will be in the eligibility phase soon. We also are going to hear a little bit from Dr. Hardy about the Vacation Learning Academy and, other pandemic response items that we're working through. And then we will end the regular meeting with the FY22, FY23 kindergarten enrollment update from Dr. Milichewski. At that point, we will adjourn to executive session for strategy with respect to collective bargaining for all units, not to return. And we'll start there. So, do we have a motion to get us started? Actually, before I do that, anybody with public comment? Joe, you got anything? No? All right, seeing no public comment, do I have a motion on the consent agenda?
I do. I move to approve the consent agenda.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Chuck. Okay, any questions, comments, or statements on that before we move on? Did you want to say something real quick?
Absolutely, on the consent agenda. So,
yes.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you at home. But I think we would like to quickly share that we're thrilled about the Desi Literacy Grant. We're going to be sharing more information about that over the coming weeks. I think we're going to carve out some time at an April or May meeting to talk through it in more detail, particularly what it looks like for us here in the Reading Public Schools. But in broad strokes, it is a grant that will help us to ensure that we have high-quality curriculum materials in the hands of all of our staff across the district, and we are really excited about the opportunity. So there's a little bit more information in the packet, and again, we look forward to talking through it in more detail at an upcoming meeting.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on the consent agenda? All right, seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? And it passes 6-0. Okay, so we will move on to reports. Smurtha?
Okay.
You're first for us.
All right, so first, coming back from break, it was really nice to finally be able to see a lot of classmates' full faces. We didn't realize how much we got used to not seeing people's faces, and it was really interesting adjusting to that, but also really nice. Also, many juniors have expressed a lot of anxiety over the upcoming SATs coming up in about a week for them, so all the best for them. This coming Friday, a lot of you guys were talking about it just now, but it's the sophomore semi, which I believe is the first one we've had in about 2 years, which we're really glad to finally see happen again, especially since the senior class, who has yet to experience a semi or prom thus far, we're looking at you, sophomores. We see you having all the dances. And a lot of AP student seniors have been a bit frustrated about the news that came out, in which anyone who has a good grade in the class can be allowed to avoid the final exam. Those who took the AP exam to avoid taking the final were frustrated by this, including myself, because they were told otherwise at the beginning of the year, which was unfortunate. Also, students have been very amused watching teachers adjust to the 75 new smart boards that have been supplied to many classrooms. Many had a lot of trouble trying to deal with the new changes as of students, but it was definitely entertaining to experience.
Good evening, everyone. I just have 2 updates for you this evening. I wanted to let you know that this week and the surrounding weeks are the Read Across America opportunity. And so that means there's some exciting things happening in our, wanted to update you on, we've talked to multiple occasions, just.
Okay.
Thank you.
Susan?
So this evening, I have just two brief updates, two brief reports, but I wanted to, first to thank Ms. Bourne's kindergarten class for inviting me in as a guest reader, and it was just a highlight of my week. Very attentively, other potential sources of funding. This is a team of students who have
Continues the ingenuity.
From the side of caution and safety for our students. So again, Reading PD is continuing to look into the situation, but can say that again was unsubstantiated. To kind of see what the community can come up with, but a fun way for our students to be engaged. And again, you'll hear a larger update on the 24th from our SROs about the work they're doing in our schools. Just the comfort dogs being one part of that discussion. And then lastly, want to give a community update on COVID numbers since return from break. To Smyrna's point, it's been a transition for us, moving to a mask optional environment. I would just like to say from my own observations of spending time in all of the schools since the transition, just really appreciate just from what I've heard, what I've seen, students, staff, be really understanding and supportive of an optional environment. Understanding that everyone has a different preference, a different comfort level, and to be comfortable and sort of and supportive with whatever people are. I've also seen a lot of students say one day they have it on, the next day they take it off, just depending on sort of different context and factors. So just appreciate how our whole community has, I think, approached this situation. A little bit of data just around what we're seeing from return to break. I'll first start with our map comparing where we were on our return from winter break to where we are now. So return from winter break, we had 1,320 students participate in pool testing with 33 positive cases. So 33 out of 1,320, and then also 183 additional cases identified that week. So you compare that with this week, we had slightly less pool tests, or last week, our first week back from break, we had 1,085 pool tests. But instead of 33 positives, we turned back 2 positives from the pool testing, which is obviously really encouraging, and also only 10 positive cases last week throughout the week. This week, we had 2 positive cases today, and also it's important to note we haven't had any athletic cases since February 14th. So I think for us, we were really trying to monitor closely the first week back from break, knowing that a lot of students did travel. We were encouraged that pool testing did not pick up a significant amount of cases, nor do we see a significant amount of cases coming back. Now we are also closely monitoring this week. We know sometimes the data can lag in terms of positivity, but we're really encouraged by what we're seeing right now in terms of spread. With that said, we are continuing to monitor on a daily basis transmission, and we'll be responsive to any sort of change either at the classroom, school, or grade level as needed to. So just like to thank, again, all of our community for our support in this transition, and also just encouraged by some of this initial data that we're seeing. But we know there's a long road ahead with this as well. So those are our updates, and I know we have plenty more to discuss in all sorts of areas tonight.
Great. So we'll move on to Liaison and Subcommittee. I'm going to switch directions and start over there. Sarah, do you have anything for us?
Nope, no report.
Okay, Aaron?
So the CPAC is not meeting tomorrow night, but they do have a few events upcoming that I wanted to share. So on March 14th, from 12:30 to 1:30, there's going to be a Zoom session hosted by Reading Public Schools, the Y, and Reading Recreation. And it's meant to be a listening session where parents can share their thoughts on what sort of activities and supports would be helpful for their families to ensure that all students are included in after-school, summer, and recreational programming. If you can't attend because it's in the middle of the day, I would suggest that you reach out to the CPAC and hopefully they can convey your questions or concerns. Also, CPAC is going to be hosting a movie night in April, Tuesday, April 12th at 7 p.m. at RCTV. They're going to film the movie This Is Not About Me, a story about growing up non-speaking.
Great, thank you. Chuck?
Yeah, thank you. The coalition met last Wednesday. It was basically an update type meeting, not a lot of, there was a lot of people missing, so it was, there wasn't anything real significant just other than updates.
Did we hear any more on interface? Has that come back online yet, or is it still offline?
That's still offline as far as I know, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Carla?
No report.
Sean?
Probably most, if not all, members of the committee either attended or watched last week's FinCom meeting, but maybe for members of the public, we did have the opportunity to review the superintendent's recommended budget with the Finance Committee on Wednesday of last week. I would say the discussion around FY23, they didn't take a vote, but I think the discussion was generally positive around FY23, and I'm not anticipating any surprises based on that conversation. We did also have some frank conversation about some of the challenges that we might be looking at going into FY24 around grants rolling off and things like that. So really good discussion, really good sort of initial signs of collaboration between the superintendent and our new town manager as well. And generally speaking, a very positive conversation.
Agree. Thank you. Just, I think the whole committee knows, but, and I think that most of the town would know as well if they're paying attention to postings, but the first ARPA committee meeting is tomorrow night at RCTV at 7 o'clock, now known as RAC. The RAC meeting is tomorrow night, so, and we are posted as well. So all the school committee members who want to join are welcome to come and join that as well. So that'll be the first one. It'll be more organizational, is my understanding, in nature, and we'll go from there. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the superintendent mid-year formative review. And, you know, at a high level, I'll just, you know, I think we'll put it out there from a high-level perspective. When I was reading through the responses from the rest of the committee, it was clear how aligned they were. You know, everybody had very, very similar feedback. People pulled different threads a little bit here and there, but overall the feedback was very strong. You know, your entry and the course setting, I think, has been really strong. You've hit the 2 goals that you've had so far, or the interim actions. You know, and we're looking forward to the rest of the process as we go through the strategy sessions this spring and into the summer. In terms of maintaining trend momentum, I think it's a pretty universal theme as well that we didn't just maintain, but we increased speed. You know, momentum has notably accelerated, I think Sean wrote in his in particular, and I think that's evidenced in many different ways, but one of which we'll hear a little bit about tonight, which is the February Vacation Academy and ideas to help close some of the gaps that our students have seen over the last couple of years. So I think that's one of the major outcomes. On the induction program, obviously we've met Chris, but we haven't seen much, so there really wasn't much to say other than keep doing it, and we'll hear more about it at the end of the year. I think some people did notice, you know, you more kind of changing tactics a little bit throughout the year as you get to know us and as you get to know the community, and recognize that kind of internal growth. Maybe that's part of the process, or maybe it's just part of your own personal growth process, but that was, you know, observed and noticed. And then I think probably the most excited the committee was, we're pretty excited about strategy and pretty excited about the entry plan, but the most excited that I saw from a theme perspective was the leadership and principal development and whatnot. So, you know, the way you laid out the plan, what's happening already now, and what that means.
We're all as a team really excited about the work that we've been doing and also really excited about the work ahead. And I would say it is, I've said this before too, but I think it is really easy to hit the ground running in a community like this where we feel as a team really supported by the community, really supported by our staff, and some really, really great people and things in place here. So it's a great place to lead, it's a great place to be, and I think we're all excited about the future ahead. So thanks for the feedback, and we look forward to continuing to deliver for the community.
Can I just say one?
Please,
So,
absolutely.
as you know, I've been around a while, and I think with you mentioned the superintendent induction, I think that there's a lot of subtle things that you're doing that I know that's where that's coming from, just from, you know, like the phone call the day of the meeting to discuss. I mean, I think that's probably good advice, and I think it's important that you do that, and I'm sure that's going well.
As consolidated by Chair Wise.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Carla. Thanks, Sean, keeping me in line here. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? All opposed? And it passes 6-0. All right, now we'll move on. The next item on the agenda is the Wood End principal search. And we have a memo, but I think you're going to walk us through it.
Correct. That's rather. Scott, are you able to pull the?
Bye, Smartha.
So Scott's going to be pulling up the memo for us. So while he's pulling it up, just one sort of logistical piece too. You'll notice that on the top of the agenda, it notes that it's a revised agenda. So Dr. King announced her retirement on Thursday afternoon. So we kind of quickly turned things around and made sure that that was on our agenda for Thursday evening. That's why you'll see the initial agenda that was posted did not include that, but given that the announcement came phase of her career. But I think so, but in the meantime, I just wanted to, again, frame that resonates with so many families too, is just her deep care and knowledge of each and every one of her students. I have so many times witnessed families coming in, and Joanne knows every student's first, last name, things about their family, which class they're in, some of their needs, some of the things they're doing well on. She knows each of her kids because she deeply cares. So her level of investment in the community, in the school, and her students is second to none. And it did not take me very long to develop that level of respect for Joanne and her leadership. So I framed this conversation saying we're entering in reluctantly, going into a principal search process, but also just with great respect for the foundation that Joanne and her team have laid. And I tell Joanne, I've already talked about this many times, we feel that it's a great sign of her strength of her leadership when she steps away and the school continues to move forward and grow. That's a sign of again, the place that the school community is in and the impact of her leadership. So more on that to come, but a huge thank you to Dr. King and for all of her work. So making that pivot now to talking through where do we go from here, we've outlined a process which is now on the screen for those who can see it. Tonight I'm going to provide a high-level summary of what the process will look like in terms of steps, timelines, and also some of the components to get feedback throughout the process. So to start, I think the question people have asked me is just where does this situate us in terms of being able to recruit and attract candidates? And I think we are at the most favorable timeline that you could sort of ask for at being in the beginning of March, which is encouraging. And also generally we've seen that both in Reading and also sort of across the sector that you are able to generally gather a stronger and larger pool for elementary principals than maybe you are at some of the other roles, leadership roles in districts. I think those two things look favorably. The other things that don't look as favorable is speaking to a couple of superintendents who have just gone through these principal searches recently, say that the job market has impacted, sort of the concerns in the job market have trickled into principal pools in terms of just the depth of some of the pools that they're seeing and the quality of the candidates in the pool. So I think, that probably shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. So again, I think there's some factors that are working in our favor in terms of timeline and just the role, but also some challenges in terms of just the context. I share that my belief is that we're going to be able to attract some strong candidates. I think Reading is a very desirable district. I think there's some really exciting things in place. I think there's going to be people who want to work at Wood End in particular and some of the great things happening there. So I think we are positioned to be able to attract good candidates. So you'll see here what the process will look like. The process started on March 3rd, and I see our HR director, who's been working side by side with me on this, Michelle Roach. The position was posted on several sites. That's just a few of them listed on there. There's many others that we're using to try to just spread the word out as far as we can. In addition, we are all using our professional and personal networks to try to get the word out, to try to, I think, not only recruit, locally, but also sort of stretch as far as we can geographically. Position was posted March 3rd. Tonight we're reviewing the process and timeline, and we've already set up a series of information sessions and feedback gathering sessions with the Wood End community. March 9th, we are hosting a coffee hour now, thanks to one of our PTO presidents, Lauren, who's going to be bringing coffee on Thursday morning at 8:30. This meeting is to, first of all, for me to be able to outline what the process is so the families can anticipate what to expect, and also for us to hear, more importantly, hear the community's feedback on what are the characteristics that they desire and they believe are necessary to in the next leader at Wood End. So more of a two-way conversation than is just me giving out information. We'll also host that same meeting at 7:30 p.m. virtually on Thursday night. When I was working through this with the PTO presidents at Wood End, Emily and Lauren, they both felt that it was important that we offer multiple ways for the community members to be involved. So offering both an in-person and a virtual was our strategy on that. We're also going to be inviting in incoming kindergarten families too, as we think they're a key stakeholder group for the Wood End community. We'll follow that up on March 10th with a staff meeting, going through the same process of sharing timelines, processes, things like that. Then following that on March 11th, we'll be sending out a survey. So this survey will be open to anyone who is reviewing resumes that have been submitted, helping Michelle and I narrow down the list of the submissions into a pool of candidates who should be interviewed, and then perhaps most importantly is then interviewing a pool of candidates and then making recommendations on somewhere between 2 and 5 finalists to move forward to the next stage of the process. We view this group as a really key group in moving the process forward. You'll see the timelines listed here, that the application, we're going to meet with the screening committee on March 24th just to talk through just operationally how is this group going to operate. Well, then the application closes on March 28th, and we'll quickly pivot to that night, meeting with the committee to debrief the applicant pool so everyone understands sort of who's in the pool, what are some of the things that we're seeing from our initial reactions, and then review the candidates who are going to be moving forward that week for interviews. Then, with a pretty tight turnaround, move forward with first round candidate interviews by the screening committee the week of March 30th, so March 30th, 31st, and April 1st. We've blocked out a long chunk of the day. That's, we're not going to use that full day. That just depends on when sort of members are available. The screening committee will make recommendations to me around finalists, and then the finalists will be selected on April 4th and then move forward to the final process, which will include final interviews by our central office team, Wood End staff and community interviews, which is similar to how that's been done in the past. Something else we're committed to is also a Wood End site visit. I, as the superintendent, believe it's important that I can spend time in classrooms with candidates, see how they see teaching and learning, see how they interact with students, see how they interact with staff, to get a feel for what they would be like in that role. And also hopefully to have the opportunity to meet with our many students across, through the day-to-day, in particular our student council. So that would be some of the things that comprise our final process. And then again, move to the home stretch would include reference checks and ideally an offer extended by April 12th. We think that this timeline is quick, but we also think this timeline is thorough. We think that it gives ample time in all of the key stages of the process, and also doesn't jeopardize us losing good candidates by extending the process too much further out, particularly into and beyond the April vacation window. So I will pause there, and I'll open up just to questions and feedback on the process.
Chuck?
In that April 6th to the 8th week, is there going to be an open mic type situation for the Wood End community to be able to ask questions and have the candidates present?
Correct, absolutely. Okay. And you have good eyes to see the 6th to the 8th from there. But I should say too, I'm trying to work really closely with the two PTO presidents from the Wood End community. Hearing from the Wood End families, they know that their PTO is very well connected to a lot of the families. So I met with the PTO presidents on Sunday, and they helped me build some of the what this is going to look like over the next couple weeks. I'm going to lean on them heavily when we get to that phase to help, how should we structure the meeting? Should it be virtual? Should it be in person? How should the questions come? Should the questions be coming from, preset from administration? Should they be coming, preset from the community? Should they be just on the spot, open back and forth? I think those are all things that if it's meant for families should be the ones sort of driving how we structure that session. So absolutely an open mic. I'm not exactly sure what the structure will look like. That'll depend on our interactions with the PTO, who we've said the PTO presidents are trying to get feedback from others in the community as well.
Thank you.
Aaron?
So first off, this looks extremely thorough, and in particular, I appreciate how inclusive it is. Collaborative as always, which is something we really appreciate from you. I'm curious, I don't even know if curious is the right word. In the past, I've been told school committee members were not on screening committees for principals. I know because I volunteered for Joshua Eaton last year, and I was told that I could not be on it. So I'm glad to see school committee included. I'm just curious about the thought process of including it, and whether you were even aware that in the past, school committee members were not included for principal searches.
First, I was not aware. And I think each day as a new central office leadership team, we learn things that we don't know that either causes us problems or challenges, or can just be, it doesn't end up having an impact, right? So no, I wasn't aware of that, and if there's particular reasons or concerns, I'm open to hearing why. I think we have, found the school committee as great partners and support in our work, and we feel that from sort of the work that we're doing at our offsite to start the year, on all the collaboration, all the other initiatives that are moving forward, reading and writing, other things that we're trying to work through, even, through the mass conference, all the different things that have been we've been working through. You've all been present in schools. You've all been present supporting us to move forward equity statement. I feel like having school committee representation in this process is symbolically important. And then I also think you bring another layer of perspective to it from your role as sort of overseeing, and governing through your role in as a school committee member. So we see your perspective as critical in this process, and I think that our teachers and our staff would be excited to have your perspective on that in this process.
Thank you.
I can just, Tom, I can add to that. I never liked that, that the school committee wasn't, that was just the style. John's predecessor actually had school committee members, so, I like that, and I think, I'm glad that you're going, I think you're spot on, that there is a perspective that's necessary to come from the committee, so thank you for adding that.
Okay, any other commentary or questions?
Do we need to select somebody then, in that case?
Well, is it up to, it's technically your committee,
Yeah.
so I think, how do you want us to handle that? Do you want us to select somebody, or do you want to, solicit input and then you can choose somebody?
Yeah. So how what we're going to do with the family and the staff is we're going to have an application process where people are going to answer a couple of questions just to speak to why are they interested and how do they feel their background aligns with what's sort of needed in the process. Now, I think it puts me in a tricky spot if I'm evaluating all of you and sort of what your criteria fit may be. So I think either I would commit to just randomly selecting out of that, or I would prefer for the committee to select, a representative to serve on the committee, if that's a reasonable perspective.
Okay. Does anybody have an immediate preference? I was going to actually suggest that it would not be Sean, because his wife is so integral in the process.
She's specifically being involved in the logistical pieces of coordinating the community sessions and is not going to be applying for one of the parent seats on the screening committee.
Okay. I don't have a problem with
Yeah,
that. I was just expecting to be two
actually,
brands on the committee, so.
Yeah,
if I like that.
not going to be two brands on the committee, I
I think
promise.
that, I was actually, when I was thinking about it, when I saw that there was, I actually thought of Sean just because of the fact that his kids go to Wood End, so none of us.
None of us do. I
So,
agree.
Yeah.
The only reason I had the pause is
No, I
because
understand.
of
No, I understand.
the communication
Yeah,
that was going on there. so.
yeah, don't worry, we already had that conversation.
already had that planned?
Yeah, we weren't going
You
to.
helped coordinate
We
all
weren't going
that.
to put anybody in position to have to think about two brands on the committee, so don't worry, yeah.
Then if nobody has objections, I don't have an objection after that one, so there you go, there's your answer.
That's great. Welcome as the first member of the committee.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions, we do have a motion here. And even if there are, we can take it after the motion, so.
Move to approve the search process for the Wood End principal position.
We have a second.
Second.
Second by Sarah. Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, all in favor? All opposed? And it passes 6-0. Okay. Thank you, Dr. M. Now we will move on to the MSBA Kilim updates. We need to switch the screen again, I think. And this is an exciting one. They're all exciting ones, but that one has a bit of sad and a bit of exciting at the same time. So now let's just move on to exciting. Joe, welcome.
Hey, Joe.
It should be the,
There you go. You can do it that way if you want.
it was the first one you were going to share when you and I were talking before the meeting. I'm not sure where that went. You can, there it is, that one right there. Nope.
It's the last tab up. It's right up there, top tab, to the
That's
right.
Wood End.
No, that's
That's
Wood
Wood
End.
End.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But maybe it is,
Yeah, we can use the packet if we have to, and just.
yeah, the EP one, that one.
There we go.
There you go. And now it's giving you a hard time.
There we go.
There we go.
Make it bigger. That's perfect. All right, that's perfect.
Okay.
I think we're good. As I learned from Dr. Hardy in our last conversation, I need to turn the remote on instead of just furiously pushing it. So thank you last week or a couple weeks ago for helping me out. We're all as a community thrilled to be able to share the update that we have entered. The MSBA Board of Directors has voted Kilim Elementary into the eligibility period. I know that was shared as a press release last week. We talked about it a little bit at FinCom last week, put in our district update, and I think there's a positive buzz around this. I think is just really, really exciting. I love the quote that Tom shared when the press release that this is a transformational opportunity for, I think, for not only for the Kilim community, but for our larger, Reading community. This is something that we think just changes the landscape of education in our community with potentially a brand new elementary school building. So we are absolutely thrilled that we are entering into the eligibility process, the eligibility phase. So what we want to do tonight is we are still very early in this process. We tonight wanted to provide a high-level overview of just what does the entirety of the process look like. Then particularly what does this eligibility period look like, and then open it up to questions and conversations, knowing that we're still early in this process. Before I dive into the specifics too, I wanted to recognize a lot of people over the past couple of weeks have come up to me, or last week, just to say congratulations. And I also want to acknowledge all of the people who have poured time into this to getting us to this phase who aren't here with us right now. So I think that even looking back to the statement of interest, looking back to Dr. Doherty and his work with Gail Dowd, with Chris Kelly, a lot of the foundation that they laid to get us to this point, I think was critical, and clearly putting forward a really compelling, case for why this is, important for our community. So I'd just like to thank the previous administrative team for their leadership work on that, and also thank the committee, other community members who have been instrumental in getting us to this point. Quite frankly, our team can't really, claim any credit for really moving us forward to this phase. I see Joe over here, who was instrumental in getting us here, our previous town manager, who helped, was critical in this phase too. There are so many people, I feel like, who just played such a part in opening these doors for us and for our community. So I think the first thing that I've heard is the question for people, so what does this mean? Where are we? What is eligibility period? So Susan's going to provide a high-level overview of just kind of what this process means step by step. After we're starting kind of high level, we'll then zoom in and talk about this period in general, the eligibility period.
So we've entered the eligibility period with the vote by MSBA. Within the eligibility period, there are 7 deliverables that need to be submitted within a 270-day period. There's an upcoming slide that gets in and defines each one of those deliverables and the due date. But let me just continue walking us through the next 7 sections. After the eligibility period, and at the end of the 270 days, our packet is resubmitted to MSBA. It's reviewed and voted on. If the MSBA votes on us continuing, we enter the forming the project team phase. That phase focuses on defining an owner's project manager and a designer selection committee. Then we move into the feasibility study, where we create an initial educational plan with space needs. From there, it's reviewed by MSBA and voted on. And then we move into the schematic design phase, where we get into the real detail of scope, budget, and timeline. That then is resubmitted to MSBA for another vote, and then we shift into the funding the project phase. which is going to require a town meeting vote for construction costs. And then we move into the actual design, construction, and completing the project. At the very end, we close with a final MSBA vote.
Susan spoke a little bit, referenced town votes. We wanted to put up just, and another question on the surface for us is just tentatively, what does this look like in terms of a timeline? This is a really rough overview of what a timeline could look like. We've been discussing this also with our new town manager as well. These dates could shift, over the course of the next few years, but wanted to point out a couple of tentative dates up there that we think are important for the community to see where we stand now. First, November 2022, the first vote for the feasibility study and schematic design funding through town meeting, which we anticipate being around $2 million. November 2024, the second vote for construction funding through town meeting, and then April 2025, the townwide vote for construction and the ballot question. And then you'll see a little bit more detail around there around sort of the percentage reimbursement rate, which we anticipate around 50%. And then also talking about how that will be presented publicly and shared before the town meeting vote in November 2024. And I also like to highlight.
Lines.
Yeah.
So, not that one, the next one. So just so the rest of the committee is aware and the rest of the public's aware, MSBA has specifically said they will not hear us before their board meeting until, at the earliest, July 2024. So we can't go before them any earlier than that. They do say that study schematic process usually takes a year and a half, 2 years, so they're not expecting us to be ready to come before them in July 2024 either. However, what's important about that is once we go before them and get their approval, then no more than 4 months to get our final approval from the town. So there's a little bit of flex we have to figure out from a town meeting perspective, the ballot initiative perspective, in terms of how that works in 2024, 2025. So those are rough times that are put out there, but it's entirely possible that there's going to be a special town meeting and a special election to align with those that 4-month limitation. So if you just played it out and said, hey, we get approval in July 2024 because we're really on the ball, then we need to have a town meeting vote, and then we need to have a full town vote within 4 months of that July meeting that they have. So it can get pretty tight, and it will cause some potential adjustments in the overall calendar, some special meetings and things like that. So just.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yep. And then Aaron after that.
Actually, if you can go to the next one, the previous, that one. So the schematic design, I think you mentioned $2 million. You thought maybe somewhere around there. That could be a sunk cost if we didn't get approved, right? I mean, that's, and how is that, would we go to the vote, the referendum on that, or just vote that within town meeting?
Town meeting.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, that's a town meeting vote. That would cover the feasibility study and the schematic design in particular. And then once we have that, that's the results of that is what we take to the MSBA Board of Directors to get their approval. They'll tell us how much they fund from a percentage perspective, and then the 4-month start.
Thank you.
Aaron.
So just sort of a couple clarifying questions. So you're saying the next time we go to MSBA is after we have the schematic design done, but before we've gone to town meeting?
So I think we're still working to get the exact timing between town meeting, what town meeting knows versus when we do the final vote and what that knows, because that might be a little bit of a challenge. So it's going to be in that range. It might be town meeting MSBA town. It might be MSBA town meeting town. But,
Okay.
what we won't know our percentage until that MSBA Board of Directors meeting.
Okay, so
Absolute
ideally
percentage.
before
So ideally,
town
it's
meeting.
before town meeting.
Okay,
So you can say, hey, by the way, you're voting to put this on the referendum. Here's how much we actually have to pay. Here's the estimate, whatever the estimate is. Let's just say 100 to keep it a nice round number. We're going to pay 50%, so you need to get a referendum for 50 million, right?
and the town meeting vote is just to put it on the ballot?
We're doing the research on that, but that's the essence of it. Yes, that's our understanding.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Carl, I know,
Sean's
so
next.
there's actually, I think, Susan, I thought that's what you said, there's actually two votes of MSBA, the feasibility, they have to approve before, and then they vote on the schematic, so there's two more votes, right?
Yes, every orange star is a board of.
Right, that's, yeah.
SBA board. So it's essentially, they're checking in with us and then giving us approval to continue.
So they could not vote for it after the feasibility, and we wouldn't get to the schematic? Is that, in theory, what that means?
I think possibly, but very unlikely. The reason why they vote is so that they can review and keep track of the process.
Okay.
What they'd like to do is examine and assess the depth and breadth of what we're presenting. They'd like perhaps some districts to go deeper in some of the information that we're providing. These are essentially check-in points, if you'd like to think of it
With votes?
that way. With votes.
Sorry, Tom.
No problem. Sean, you were going to ask a question as well?
Yeah, could you just go to the next slide, please? So if I understand what you're saying correctly, the 120 days from the board authorization would have to get us to the townwide ballot vote, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this almost certainly will not be the timeline then, because we won't, it's not feasible to do November and then April.
Correct.
Okay.
So somewhere in that range.
It's either a special election.
It could be a special town meeting or a
town
special
meeting, yeah.
election or something
Because
along
they
those
have to be
lines.
close enough together.
Have to be close enough.
Right, yep.
Exactly.
Okay.
Carla?
The $2 million for the feasibility and schematic design, isn't that part of that reimbursable by MSBA?
Part of it is reimbursable,
It is, yeah.
Right, okay,
but they haven't told us what percentage of it,
right.
right?
Correct.
Okay, sorry, Doctor.
No, Joe, is there anything you wanted to add on? So one thing is, Susan will walk us through the eligibility period, which I think we just quickly highlighted. One thing to note is that the eligibility period doesn't start until June 1st, so that's our 270 days. I think our team has been very eager, team, I say, sort of, on the town side, the school side, to kind of get the ball rolling on things, and MSBA said, again, staggering projects that we're not, our eligibility period doesn't start till June 1. So as much, it's still a lot of information that we're trying to seek and that we'll sort of have been assured that we'll get as we gear up and get closer to the eligibility period. But Susan's going to walk us through just a high-level overview of just what is it, going to kind of broken down by the different phases here throughout the period.
And I'll refer the school committee members to a letter that's included in your packet that actually includes the dates of when these dates are delivered. So for example, our eligibility period commences on June 1st. The first requirement is due 30 days later on July 1st. Our school building committee will be formed, and that needs to be submitted to the state within our packet within 60 days, which would be July 31st. We already have a list of potential positions and people who could fill that committee. The educational profile is due on August 30th, along with an online enrollment projection. The enrollment certification is executed in November of 2022, November 28th, along with the maintenance and capital planning information, which Joe Huggins could speak to, and much of that has already been compiled. The local vote authorization, February 27th, 2023, and then finally, the facility study agreement is submitted on the 27th of February, 2023. We do have a kickoff with our project manager at MSBA mid-April. So at that time, we'll be delving into each one of these components in detail. So we'll be able to be much more knowledgeable about what is entailed. Both Joe Huggins and I have done a little bit of research, and we've looked at other communities and what they've submitted for many of these components. So I found it really helpful to see what the final product looks like that MSBA is requiring, so.
Can I ask?
Sure.
Susan, can you just explain what maybe I should know the online enrollment projection. What is that?
There's a survey on the MSBA website that we would complete that asks for essentially enrollment information, projections.
Okay, I understand. I didn't know whether it meant that we have, some online students or, I get it. Thank
That's a
you.
good question.
Tom?
Aaron?
In this context, what is local vote authorization?
This is the vote, and maybe Joe can correct me, but I believe that this is the vote required for
The feasibility study.
the schematic and feasibility studies.
So this is the approval of town meeting for 2 million.
Yeah, 2 to 2.5, depending
plus,
upon where the
yeah.
market is, but yeah.
Okay, which we anticipate we'll be able to do for November town meeting, so
We
well
have
within.
to do for November.
Well
town
within
meeting.
the town.
Right.
Okay,
I
thank
guess
you.
that's the other point, and where you're going, is all the dates that Susan said are the latest dates.
Okay,
We can do it earlier if we're ready to be done earlier.
Mostly pertains to this, but I do know that it pertains to the educational profile questionnaire. They emphasize the fact that we needed to take our time, really think about these spaces, think about our instruction and how we want to deliver instruction to students. This is obviously a huge investment for the community in a building that will be with us for quite some time. So they cautioned us not to contract out this service, but, certainly seek support, but really do a lot of this work with our educators, with our instructional leaders to develop spaces that will work best for our students. I believe that's what they were referring to.
Great, thank you.
Okay?
So I think at this point, we can walk through, in the packet, you'll see that there's more detail. It's actually a lot of the information that we, as a team, got when we went through the Module 1 orientation. So I don't think we were planning on walking through each of those tonight, but we'd be happy to answer any questions, and I know we have, Joe's here as well, and
Joe and Pat are
Pat's
both
there
here.
as well. I never formally met Pat, so I was assuming that
you were
was Pat, but I didn't want to say.
So the only thing I'll add now is that school building committee deliverable there, 60 days from June 1st would be the end of July. However, we also have the permanent building committee documentation in our bylaws/charter. They're not necessarily aligned in terms of the legalese of what's required in each of those. So we're working through what that means. The PBC, for example, says that the permanent building committee itself is the committee, and we can add additional members to that committee. That's what the bylaw says, essentially. This is saying it's a school building committee. So we need to figure out how to align those, and we're working to figure out what that is and when, right? Does this committee supersede the PBC committee? Because PBC is for reviewing and administering major town building design studies and construction projects. When does that officially start? So there's some logistics there that we want to work through to see, how we fill this out. And Pat and I have had a few very preliminary discussions about what that is, but we're also getting town council to look at that and say, what is our responsibility there in that space? We do know that we can update the school building committee from an MSBA perspective throughout the process. It doesn't have to be the same group of people the entire time, and we can send an update in, but they do have kind of veto rights. If we send an update in and they don't like that update, they can say, no, go back and try again. So, we'll work through that. I do anticipate, though, that we're going to try to put our initial view in place, ideally sometime in May or June, so we can be compliant with that 60 days, as long as we can answer some of those other charter/bylaw related questions as well. So we're trying to thread a needle a little bit there as we go through it. Carla?
Didn't they mention in the orientation also that they knew that piece of it may be in conflict with, different communities' bylaws and things like that?
Yep.
So hopefully we're getting our mentor in on these discussions as well?
Yeah, she's going to meet with us the first time in the middle of April or something like that. So it'll be one of those questions, but it's also the kind of legal wrangling of what does our documentation say? An interpretation of when do they officially have to come on board as the PBC? We're aware of that and we're watching out for it. John?
Just one last thought. Susan, you were talking about the importance of the educational profile and engaging our instructional leaders and the folks in the building. You've probably already figured this out. I'm just going to say it out loud just to be sure. That 90 days, 2/3 of it, most of the people in that building will not be around. So we should probably, sharpen our pencils while people are still here, to borrow a phrase. Sharpen our pencils while everybody's still in the building over the next quarter.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we have talked about getting started right away.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to point out that it's really important to engage the community in these discussions, too. I didn't want to leave anyone out, but yet it'll be important for us to reach out and speak with everyone before.
Also difficult during the summer, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
before they
Yeah.
go away for the summer.
So that's actually a great lead-in, Susan, so thank you. One of the things that has been on our calendar pretty much all year since we knew this project was there was kind of a public forum on Kilim overall. So we'll try and figure out how best to slot that in April, May, maybe early June, to get some of that information that may be necessary for the, profile questionnaire, as well as solicit other feedback and points from the community. It'll be the first, but not the last time we do such things, obviously, as we have more of a design, what it looks like, and things along those lines. But for those of you interested in joining into that process, not just you, but the you, we'll have something scheduled here in the April, May timeframe, maybe early June, to start that process, depending on how the calendar lines up.
Can I just,
Sure, Chuck?
and maybe Joe could, is GNAP still involved in this, or will they still be involved?
They will not be involved in this.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Carla?
What about the enrollment study? Do we pull from GNAP, do we?
Go ahead.
I think I can answer. So we will use KNAP's earlier study and the study that was also prepared by NASDAQ. I've recently reached out to another demographer enrollment forecaster to see if his firm could be available. We'll look at a couple other organizations to see what they could do to help us update the documents, but I think whatever studies we have, we'll consult them all.
Thank you.
Best of breed study. We'll have a best of breed study. Okay. Any other topics or any other questions from the committee or anybody else in the meeting? Joe and Pat, thank you for joining in. Pat, any questions you have? Great. Okay, well then we will move on. And we'll move on to the pandemic response, Vacation Learning Academy update. And we'll need a switch of the view again here, I think, to switch the other presentation. And then Dr. Hardy.
Excellent.
Yeah, the Google version.
Thank you. All right, well, I am excited to share out with you a little bit about the results of February Vacation Academy. You've heard me talk about our planning process, and I have to say, just in general, for me, what an exciting week it was to be here. It was quiet in the schools, not the usual amount of students and staff, but the students and staff that we did have here really had, I think, a remarkable week. And for me, it was just a joy to kind of get to know some of our students and see some of our teachers in action in a slightly different environment. So personally, I'll just share that. I wanted to just back up for a second and in regards to pandemic response, as you say, as we're thinking about what our students need right now to ensure that we are impacting the interrupted learning that they experienced in the best way possible to move them ahead and start to close those gaps. As we look at the many studies coming across our desks and the information we're receiving, we are really hearing over and over again that extended learning is a primary strategy that we should be considering instead of just backing up and remediating. And so that idea of the just-in-time supports is something that I really actually saw happening in our February Vacation Academy, as you had students interacting with grade level standards and the teacher seeing they're not quite there, stepping in the moment and scaffolding for them and getting them to interact with that grade level standard and actually show progress towards it. Because of the small groups that we had, we were really able to see that happening. two other food for thought here. The, just that extended learning time through acceleration academies held during school breaks, in particular, this one article points to that it was really helpful in addressing that unfinished learning. And again, the next study that I linked in here talking about things that are happening outside that school day. And so obviously this February vacation is an example of that. When I get to the next steps at the end, I'll share a little bit too about some other opportunities. So that's kind of why we took on this idea of looking at something over February vacation for our students. Quick rundown again of the program. We were able to provide instruction to kids starting in 3rd grade all the way up through high school. It did look a little bit different at each level. Grades 3 through 5, those students were in school for 4.5 hours for 4 days. Well, actually 3. Focus in those grade levels specifically on math. If you remember from seeing our MCAS results, we felt that was an important area of learning that was interrupted for our students, and so giving them kind of that intensive time in math we felt would be the best use of their time. And then for high school, it was a little bit different. We provided some prep sessions for our students, knowing also that one of the things that gets lost sometimes when you have shorter amount of time in school is some of those test prep strategies that we know are important to our students being successful. And so we were able to provide PSAT, SAT, and that was both ELA and math prep for those, and then some math MCAS prep. So just looking at participation, this is the breakdown of, on the left, you'll see the total number of students here. We've got our middle school, elementary, and our exam prep. And you can see our exam prep, even though it was, not even necessarily, I think we had primarily 10th and 11th graders that participated in that, a handful of 9th graders, and one really ambitious 8th grader. You'll see that was still a pretty big group. We had good participation there. But with elementary being our biggest group. I also want to highlight too that we did outreach to get students to come into February Vacation Academy. We did offer it to every family in the district, but we had our principals and teachers reach out to students in their classes they felt would particularly benefit from this. Along those lines, one group of students that we reached out to as well were our Boston resident students, and we did provide busing so that they could attend. And so we did have students from Boston that came up each day to participate. And in general, I wanted to just give you a little info too. We did have better attendance at the in-person sessions. And so we had a slight decrease on the day that we had the virtual sessions. Not every student attended, but that's okay. At the end, in addition to debriefing with the staff, we also surveyed parents just to find out what worked for them, what didn't work, and kind of asked some general questions. A positive piece of information that we got back, I think a lot of parents indicated to us that if we did offer an April vacation, that they would consider coming again. Some of the maybes were indicating that it depended if they traveled or not. So I think we had some maybes, but they said if we're not traveling, we would come. But I did put them as a maybe in order to accurately represent what they had shared. So I feel like that was a positive. We got a lot of positive feedback from families, and teachers did too, just, incidentally and at pickup and drop off. But I'll just quickly share with you some of the feedback that we got from our staff, both positive and then the constructive feedback, because that's what will help inform our practice as we move forward. So some of the successes, and this really helps us think about what pieces of the structure we'd want to preserve as we would move ahead with another academy. Staff felt that having those smaller group sizes was really favorable. And then kind of depending on the day, teachers did share with me what they gathered. And so, for example, a number of our teachers that were instructing in math would give the students a pre-assessment coming in that day, work on the concept, and then assess with an exit ticket. And they all saw growth over the course of the day, that students were able to perform a function in math that earlier in the day was a struggle for them. And that, also speaks to that confidence that kids felt with the material that the teachers were reviewing. And then with the high school students, I actually got to witness this myself one of the days when I was visiting. They were really, by the end of the week, able to verbalize the specific skills that they were going to try, and then able to show that on some of the practices that they did. And actually learned a lot going into those. If I had to take the SATs again, I think I would do better. Our teachers had some really good strategies, which to me allow our students to show off the things they've learned when they're not going to be bogged down by some of the logistics of the test. And all the teachers kind of felt the session lengths felt appropriate, longer for elementary, a little bit shorter for middle and high school. So. When we reviewed over the parent results, we had about 30 parents respond, so a smaller percentage, but they also felt that the project-based learning, like I'd mentioned, was a success. Our teachers incorporated some mindfulness activities that happened at a few of the levels, and parents spoke positively about that. And also, another little side effect we hadn't anticipated at elementary were students being paired up with students from other schools. And I think our 5th grade teacher did a really nice job of talking to the kids about it too. Like, these might be some students you meet in middle school next year. It was a nice side effect. Having the bus for our Boston resident student was a highlight. And parents did note how quickly we pivoted to remote instruction on the Friday, so.
Got experience.
It is. Choose to see it as a positive, something we've learned, an area we've grown in. So in general, positive feedback about strategies that students learned and the staff that were there. So these are all great, and they will help inform our structure. We also wanted to look at the things that didn't work or that people had suggestions for improvement. So our staff that worked there felt like that we had provided them with some information about the students going into the week, but they were able to be more specific about what would have helped them kind of hit the ground running with students. So that was really good feedback for us. At the high school level, we had broken the students down by grade, and the teachers suggested that we look a little bit more as to what the students were trying to get out of the sessions. Some students were trying to a little bit more remediate skills, and others were, pressing more for like that perfect score and wanted to really hone their strategies. The staff did say that having students miss a day was challenging, so maybe working with families to try to get there every day would improve some of the outcomes for kids. And then because we opened it to everyone, we did have a wide range of needs in the class, and so that did make it a little bit more challenging for teachers. On the flip side, some did actually say that was a benefit, because when you had model students, it actually helped move everyone along. So it was a little bit of a mixed feedback there. Families were also able to provide us with some constructive feedback. When they had students participating, like elementary and middle and high school, with the times being a little bit different, that was challenging. A few families said 8 o'clock was rough as a start time during vacation week. And then the midday pickup at 12:30 was also hard with some of our families due to their work schedules. And then similar to kind of what I was saying with the staff feedback, some students felt the work was a little bit too easy, and then others said it was a little bit too challenging. So that trying to meet the needs of a wide group was still challenging. And we had feedback also about increasing some of the SEL activities, that would be helpful. So one of the other things we asked families in our survey is, like, would you participate in a summer vacation academy? And I felt like we had a really strong result here that families would be interested in that. The maybes had a lot of questions, depending on if it's full day, depending on this and that. But overall, just about everyone had interest. And so that really points me to our next steps for extending learning outside of the school day. We will continue to look for these opportunities. In particular, we've already started the process of talking about an April Vacation Academy. I think we would probably use a similar format, just because we have this template in place of how something worked, and then build on it. And of course, implementing the feedback that I've mentioned with you tonight. In particular, one thing we were talking about around that feedback around more SEL support is even looking at something a little bit different at the high school. We've heard that our high school students sometimes need support even around some of that was executive functioning areas, organizing themselves, and so that could be another academy that we run. So that's something we are, of course, in the process of planning for summer programming. That's been ongoing for a while. The feedback from running February Vacation Academy will be really helpful for us to solidify what those plans look like. And one thing that's still really new, it didn't even make it into the presentation, is we're actually starting to look at some tutoring that would happen outside of the school day. So it's still very new, more to come on that. But, you know, as I've said since the start of this presentation, we believe this is a really strong strategy for us, extending learning. We think it's something that will be helpful to our students, and so we'll continue to explore. But I would welcome any questions you have.
Chuck?
So first of all, thank you. I love this. I think this is great, and thank you for taking the lead and doing this. Just a few questions. When you did and I also love the fact that you did exit surveys about what they did or liked and what they didn't like. When you did the survey about April and summer, I'd be interested to know what levels were interested in coming back. Was it slanted towards the younger kids or the old?
Yeah.
So that would be interesting to know. And then also, have you talked to any of your networks? What other are other communities doing this, or are we breaking new ground here? Or I hope.
I know there are other communities doing it, but of the folks that I talk to regularly, none were doing it. And in fact, during that week, my mentor, who's the assistant superintendent in Westwood, came up and toured the academy and took a look at it. So it was nice to be able to show it off. I do know, like, summer is something that is, a lot more common and popular. I think the Vacation Academy has its challenges, as we talked about along the process of, having staff in, especially when they feel like they need a break. So I think it is, we're charting a course a little bit here.
It's great. Thank you.
Chuck, one thing I would add too is there's a few urban communities who've been doing this more consistently over the past few years. I mean, there's a lot of publicity around what Lawrence has done, Boston, Salem, a lot of local communities, urban communities. I think kind of what pushed us in this direction too is the idea of the pandemic recovery, right? We saw just the gaps, just the traditional school day, we don't feel is enough right now to close sort of as good of instructions you can have during that 8 to 3 days. It's just not enough to move the needle for some students. And I feel that that's what kind of pushed us to follow that. But I think outside of a lot of the, kind of the local urban communities, we haven't seen a lot of other communities take this on too. And again, that's one of this was a pilot for us. I think your point about feedback, good, bad, we saw this as a pilot. We don't know, we're going to make some small adjustments for April, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But again, that feedback was so critical to us because we didn't expect to kind of knock it out of the park and have everything figured out in round one. So.
Sarah?
Thank you.
So two things. One, a lot of great learnings there, I think. Excited to see how it went, and things that we could potentially apply to future vacation academies and potentially also to general classroom learning as well. Some of the small group, project-based, social emotional stuff. Love the executive functioning idea, especially for middle school and high school. When we hosted Sarah Ward a few years ago for CPAC hosted it, but it was for any families or students. It was the most widely attended presentation we've done. The Parker Auditorium was packed, and I've never seen so many parents dragging their children to a presentation with their pencils and notebooks in hand, like, we're taking notes during this presentation and you were going to be part of this. So I think you would get a lot of interest in an executive functioning academy.
Sarah, we have one staff member who is or possibly staff member, one that we know is an executive functioning coach.
Awesome.
And I went to one of her trainings that she was leading for staff this year, and she says, okay, we're this hour and a half chunk, we're talking about time management. Here's 6 apps, resources, strategies that you can use. Several of which most of which I'd never seen before, but I can see that some of those I gravitated to and said that this would help me. These ones might not. And I could start to see how that type of explicit coaching and support in a area like executive functioning could be so instrumental to our kids. And I think what a lot of our teachers are saying is really lacking right now is they'll say either the school skills, right, or executive functioning skills. So that's something we're definitely looking at. And trying to pair that with some of our staff who have that expertise.
Awesome.
So thank you for validating that.
Sean?
2 questions. First, for April, I know we're just in the beginning of the planning process, but are we thinking roughly the same scale and scope as February for April?
Yes.
Okay. And then one thing that was in your comments about the survey results about whether folks would participate in an April Vacation Academy was that, just that thing about scheduling. Do we have a vacation plan, that kind of thing? So, we know that there are some number of kids who might have very much benefited from this that weren't able to join it because of vacation plans and things like that. So going forward, and I know we're probably jumping the gun here, but going forward, are we anticipating any kind of, proactive, early in the year sort of outreach to targeted students to try and get ahead of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one of the things we really wanted to pilot was, offering to everybody versus figuring out an exact criteria and inviting certain students. And I think we still are sorting that out, but the sooner we can get the invite out there, the better we're going to be.
Okay, so I'm going to build on that. April's coming quickly. Are we thinking about the invite for April now? And I'm sure it's going to go to the greater community as well, not just the February vacation kids, because February might be taking a vacation in April, but those who are taking a vacation in February may not be taking a vacation in April. So, and using this feedback, are we thinking more targeted, or are we thinking let everybody in for April? Have we configured that yet?
Right now, we're in the step of aligning the staff that we would have available, which
That
is
was going to
really.
be my second question. So
Our
you beat
first
me to
is
it.
really, that's the approach we've taken, is kind of to see who do we have available for staff, and then how can we accommodate students, knowing that we don't want to invite students and then not have staff available.
One other criteria too is just the funding piece too, right? Is
That was
making
my
sure
next
that
question.
we've worked together sort of where we're investing in strategies that we think are going to move the needle for our kids. And I think we see some initial, reasons to be encouraged, but I think we also want to make sure that we can fit the plans within sort of the confines of what we have financially. And I think right now we're optimistic that we can run, or we know we can run a similar sort of structure, similar scale with sort of, with funding too.
So funding was my next question in terms of, if we step back and look at February, do we know yet how much it cost? I would assume, because we know that the stipends we were giving the teachers, and we know how many teachers there were, just do the multiplication. And if we're going to do the same for April, I'm asking this because we have an ARPA meeting tomorrow. And this fits naturally into the historical definition of what ARPA was for. So ideally, we don't have to limit ourselves to what our existing funds are if we can say this is an ARPA pandemic recovery related cost question. So if we have enough information to go into tomorrow night that says this is what it cost us in February, if we want to replicate that in April, this is what it would cost us. And if we know what it would look like in summer, at some scale, maybe the same scale, maybe smaller, maybe bigger, this is how much we would want to ask for in that phase as well. Kind of a leading question that maybe you don't have the answer for yet, but.
I think our initial look at the budget was that we had funding for what we were hoping to run in April. And we just, was that this morning?
Yes.
Met to talk about the grants that we might have available for summer programming. So we are, we're hopeful that we will have funding available. More funding would allow more options. And certainly what we're looking at for summer programming would be slightly expanded from this, hopefully. But that, it's the grant, one grant we have we're rolling over, and then one grant we're just getting ready to apply for, so.
Okay.
Susan, do you have a fund yet of February, even a ballpark of what?
Yeah, the ballpark is about $34,000. It hasn't settled yet, but it's about within that range. I expect April will be something similar. And when we met this morning, our summer programming is being developed now, so it will be more expensive because it will be over a
Longer
5-week period
Okay.
and serve more students. But as Dr. Hardy mentioned, we've identified 2 grants.
Presuming we get them, right? Or one we have already and there's one we're applying for?
Yes.
Okay. Somewhat similar to that is the tutoring, because the other question I wrote down on my thing is after school. So is that the plan for the tutoring that you mentioned, Dr. Hardy? And is there more there that we can pull a little bit and understand a little bit more what the plan is there?
So we'd be looking at before or after school, based on kind of when the staff member is available. So we're in the process right now of reaching out to staff and looking at, who is available right now to provide tutoring. We're looking at kind of that last section of the school year.
always on top of it. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Two other things just to add to is one, also just funding-wise, proportionate shares at play too, when we're looking at sort of, did have a student from Austin Prep participate too, so that's something that we're looking at, is just we're mapping out sort of costs and things like that too. And then the second piece is with tutoring. I think we viewed that as like, again, the challenge of, do we put out the need, do we try to look at first student need first and then fill it with staff, or do we look at getting staff first and then filling with students? I think what we found was the best strategy right now, especially at the end of the year, especially with timelines being tight, was to get staff availability and then sort of figure out what scale we could, work with students. We also think once we roll out tutoring, that we can expand the scale pretty easily. But it's we've mapped it out as an 8-week cycle, tentatively starting March 30th. And our thing is saying that we'd have staff apply to the district level, sort of get approval from the district level, and then the school sites would then, there's building-based leadership teams would look at identifying kids that would, they think, have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, who would benefit from targeted tutoring. They would select some of the specific standards, they would select some of the specific days and the time like that. So we've just finished that exercise of toggling what's district level control and expectations, and also then what comes down to school level as well.
And you're obviously already thinking about it, as you always do, late buses that might be necessary or anything else along those lines as well?
And we are, and fortunately, some of our Boston buses arrive early. I think some of the work of Mr. Martin has allowed us to extend, I now have more, late buses at play too. So I think we have some of the, particularly for our Boston resident students, the busing now, I think, enables some additional participation. I should also say that Mr. Martin is also kind of separately, while Boston resident students are invited to participate in this type of tutoring, is a drop-in tutoring center after school every day that is going to be staffed by a different department every day. So that way students can go drop in, Boston resident students can go drop in for it's like math support on Monday, ELA support on Tuesday, science and, science Wednesday. Those are just 10 sort of dates. In addition to the targeted tutoring, what he has noticed is that sometimes the student will go get extra help, till 3:40.
Up to some of them that they might be able to, the juniors and seniors might be able to help the freshmen and sophomores in certain classes as well, which might include expand your scale and give them their NHS hours and things like that they need from a volunteer and support perspective.
Tutoring initiative at Wood End, a couple of Wood End alums, which is awesome, right? So I think there is definitely students out there who would love to be partners. So I'm glad you raised that, and for us to think about them and partnering with us in these initiatives. It's good feedback.
Okay. So much good news here. Okay, anybody else? All right. I think we're ready to move on then, unless you have any closing remarks. Nope, okay.
On to April, right?
On to April.
On to April.
Thanks again, Sarah.
Yes, thank you very much. So FY22, FY23 kindergarten enrollment. Dr. Milczewski.
Perfect. So I'll start with a little bit of framing, then Susan will talk to you about what's in the packet. I think as a bit of framing, you'll see on the cover letter here, we had, projected enrollment for 2022, 2023 for kindergarten enrollment to be 250 students. And right now we have 191, actually now as of today, 193 kindergarten students enrolled, right? 184 for full day K and 9 for half day K. Now, something our team, being a new team, has tried to figure out is how much do these patterns sort of align with patterns in the past? Are we behind? Are we in line? Can we expect more to trickle in? And I think just from anecdotally, we feel we're a little behind where we anticipated being in this timeline. So what we were hoping to do is we think we've sent out, communication with, sort of with the community through a couple of different modalities, but what we feel like our next step is to work with the town, identify sort of all of the students who we know are kindergarten age through our census data, and then be able to make sure we can proactively reach out to each individual family. Right now, we're concerned that gap is 57 students, even though we're still ways away, but we're concerned. But I think we just need to ramp up our efforts as an administrative team and our focus onto making sure we can identify, where are those additional students, and if they need support with registrations, have they enrolled elsewhere, are they still on the fence about half day versus full day, what are those sort of things that we can work through with them. So I think we were hopeful that while tonight we'll share the data and walk through it, we could also commit to revamp, kind of ramping up our efforts to find, additional kindergarten students, and then come back in mid-April to be able to share out just sort of where we are and give us a better picture on some of the strategic decisions we'll have to make in response to the data. So Susan, you want to share what's in here now? And then
Sure, I'd be happy to. As Dr. Milachewski mentioned, at the time that we prepared this memo, we had 191 students enrolled. Today, we received 2 more registrations. But during the period of last week, we received an additional 14. So although our enrollment is growing slowly and we're about 80% where we projected, we still think that it would be an enormous help and of value if we targeted those students who our census data identified as being eligible for enrollment this fall. So we will be reaching out to those families. We'll also be reaching out, I think, to some of the programs in the community to see if there'll be students kindergarten age moving in. Before you is the 2023 enrollment projections by school, by classroom for half day and full day, and compared against the registrations we received as of February 28th. Start first, though, with Birch Meadow and Wood End being very close to where we thought they would be for next year in terms of the numbers. During this last week, we received 6 more registrations, so they're getting closer to their projections. Joshua Eaton is off by about 22 students, which is about 1 class size. This week, we received another 3 registrations, so hopefully we'll be able to close that gap. And then lastly, Kilim was off by 23 students as of last week, and again, during this past week, we received 4 more registrations for Kilim. So I think slowly we'll see more and more registrations coming in. I think the biggest surprise for me was seeing only 9 students so far have registered for half-day K. So the majority of students are coming in so far and registering for full-day kindergarten. So that was encouraging.
Erin, you.
So I have a few questions. In the initial paperwork that gets sent out to families, is there an opportunity for families to respond at that point and say, we're holding our student out a year, or we're sending our student to private? Do we get those communications or no?
I don't believe there's any type of Q&A. What we do is send out essentially the packet.
So they either register or we
not.
don't know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, I hate to go here, but I'm going to go here because the numbers are here. Do we have cutoffs at which a class would be deemed too small to justify a teacher? 9 half-day. I have to assume if it stayed that small, we'd be talking about 1 classroom for the district, as an example, but there's other very low numbers on here. So what's the ballpark
Great
there?
question. So I think we've started to think through that. I think the reason why we've asked the committee for just a couple of extra weeks is that we feel like we need to be more targeted. You can see by, sort of school community, sort of areas of town, particularly looking at the census data, knowing family or direct communication with families, outreach with some community partners who can help us. We feel there's more to do on our end to just be sort of, go out and find and, connect with families. So with that said, I couch that saying I'm nervous to start sort of playing the game yet of what will we do here, if we're going to revisit the conversation in a month. I would, in full transparency, we think through those things, but I would rather have a more complete data set. I think the committee meeting that would be helpful is the 24th to talk through it. And then I think at that point, we'd have to start to, provide hard and fast numbers on what we would do. And if we're under, 15 students in this class, what do we do here? I think those are all trade-offs and decisions we're going to have to make. But I would just be nervous about having those tonight, given the efforts that we think we can, put forth to bring in more students.
Okay. And no promises have been made about where half-day classrooms will be located or how many we will have in the district to families?
I think if you see down here on the bottom, sort of the note.
Yes, this note is the process that the school district took last year to establish those two half-day classrooms. So for example, the half-day classroom at Joshua Eaton is driven by Barrows, Joshua Eaton students, and the half-day classroom at Kilim is driven by those students who live in Birch Meadow, Wood End, and Kilim neighborhoods.
But was that promise made to incoming kindergarten families?
We have communicated what we're planning on doing.
Okay.
And we know, and we recognize with that the challenge, if we are then to sort of pull away from that. So I think we're hopeful that we're able to sort of fulfill what went out as the commitment. And I know that we've heard from community members who have shared that when that's been shifted in the past, that has caused challenges and hardships for families too. So I think we're very aware of that and trying at all costs to avoid that where possible.
I'm just curious, we lowered the tuition, and I'm just wondering if we're going to get the numbers to justify the 2 classrooms this year. So I am happy to give you a few more weeks. I hope the numbers come up. I would love to avoid this scenario, but at the same time, there's a certain point at which, like, you just can't justify having a classroom.
Sean?
So I'm not that anxious about the half-day numbers yet, because my recollection from having been to the incoming kindergarten night is the principals make it clear that it's easier and better to register for full day and then back off to half-day if you're on the fence than the other way around. So I think it's probably not unexpected to see this, and I'm sure particularly in a year like this one, when we were actively talking about what tuition would look like, there might have been even more of that. So I'm not too anxious about it just yet. I will say, though, and we talked about this, there's going to be a year, probably, where the tuition gets low enough that it does trigger that place where we get to, we really can only justify a single class. So hopefully we're not in that situation this year, but I think we should be really thoughtful next year and in future years about messaging that our plan is, X school and Y school, but based on class sizes, we may collapse that down to a single building, for instance. So I'm not that anxious about it yet. I did go back and look at sort of where we were over the last few years. 2 years ago, we were also more than 50 short of what the census projected at the time of the enrollment update. The year before, we were already over 300 registrations. So it seems to sort of ebb and flow, and I don't see any real rhyme or reason for it, but I think all the steps you all are taking over the next few weeks to sort of close the loop with the folks that the census has identified is the right thing to do.
Just building on that a little bit, I think the last 2 years, COVID's a big impact, right? So, you could have the other option, which is I'm holding my kid back a year because they're not ready yet because of all the other challenges that have happened that hits us, and then we have a kind of a bumper crop next year, for lack of a better way to put it. That's one thing. I have the same concerns. I'm not anxious, but I have the same concerns that Aaron's raising. And I note, without trying to be too typical, but Joshua Eaton and Kilim are the 2 schools that have more of the high-density housing units generally within them. So when you think about reaching out, you might want to reach out to the specific buildings as well, in addition to working through Laura to see who's registered where, but you have more of that in the JE and Kilim areas. And that's probably, frankly, a transient population a little bit as well, since there's more apartments and less homes. So you might have a little bit of people who didn't get the letter that have just recently moved in, especially some of them have finished construction relatively recently as well. So you might see more as you reach into some of those, areas. I would also venture to guess that, and that's in fact was stated specifically why Kilim's projection was going to be so high from NASDAQ a couple years ago, was because the oncoming high-density housing options coming in those spaces. So I'm not surprised those are the 2 schools that you're seeing lagging in from a permanency of residency perspective. Anybody else? Okay. Just 414, we're talking about this in April. So you have a month, I suppose, a little bit over a month to work it through, but we put it on the agenda for 414 as of now, which will give you enough time to get the sneaker beat going and work our way through the different.
I'm on it.
We will, we're on it. And I think the other thing too is we, hopefully at that point, we'll commit to being able to provide more clarity on just sort of to Aaron's points on the data we don't collect up front about why there's some of the selections on, we may identify our numbers are close to here, but this is why. And I think right now we're searching for not only where are the students, but also why in sort of some of the trends we're seeing. So we'll commit to having that 414, you say. We're on it. Thank you for the feedback.
Okay, great. So that ends our primary meeting, and we will now be moving our way into executive session. So to do that, we'll take a motion.
Move to enter into executive session for the purpose of strategy with respect to collective bargaining pertaining to all bargaining units not to return.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Carla. Executive session is a roll call vote, so we'll do that real quick. Sarah?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Chuck? Aye. Carla?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
And Tom, aye. 6-0. Thank you.